All right, time to pick up the pace for you of today's list. For those of you just now checking in, number one, unquestionably, we're drilling down on the mountain of classified military reports that suddenly have become available online. They're calling them the Wikileaks, as in leaked, as in given information that you're maybe not supposed to be seeing. The website is called Wikileaks. It posted the thousands of documents overnight. I've been going through some of this stuff. So has the staff here with Rick's List. So have many producers at CNN and around the world. We want to take a few items and drill down on it for you to try and make sense of exactly what it is that's in these documents that you've probably been hearing so much about. And to be transparent, by the way, it handed over the documents to 3 newspapers, WikiLeaks did, because they don't disseminate the information, they get the information. They gave it to The Guardian in London, they gave it to Der Spiegel, that's the German newspaper, and they also gave it to the New York Times. The papers had to agree not to print the story until now. On to number 1 on the list. This is what I was just talking to, if you caught part of my tail end of my conversation with Eric Erickson about. The Taliban, according to some of the information contained in these documents, is now using portable heat-seeking missiles, much like the Stinger missiles that were used during the Mujahideen war against the Russians. The military's never copped to this, never admitted this, at least not in reports that we've seen. See those right there? Those are the shoulder-mounted devices like these. An American C-47 or Chinook transport helicopter we know was struck shortly after takeoff in one incident reported in these documents. Now, here's what was reported. Listen to the language here. Multiple witnesses saw a smoke trail behind the missile as it rushed toward the helicopter. The smoke trail was an important indicator. Rocket-propelled grenades do not leave them. Heat-seeking missiles do. The crew of the other helicopters reported the downing as a surface-to-air missile, a SAM strike, right? Well, that's not what the public story that was put out by a NATO spokesperson the day it happened. This is what's troubling some Americans. Here's the quote from the New York Times. Clearly there were enemy fighters in the area, said the spokesman at the time, Major John Thomas. It's not impossible for small arms fire to bring down a helicopter. So in that quote, he's making it sound like it was just a small arms fire, whatever is meant by that, while there's conflicting information that seems to show that it may have been a SAM, a surface-to-air missile. I want to bring in our expert on this right now as we go through the material. Paul Rykoff is good enough to join us now. Paul, you there? You with us?
I am. Good to be with you, Rick.
Just that one part right there, the possibility that these guys may be using, implementing these shoulder-harnessed missiles. We hadn't necessarily heard that officially from the military nor from reporters there. What's your take on that?
Well, I think overall, when you look at this situation, Rick, we understand that government accountability and transparency are important, but it needs to be balanced with the need to protect national security and the safety of our troops. So what folks have to understand is there are critical security concerns sometimes when you withhold certain pieces of information. For example, the U.S. doesn't expose troop movements. We don't say where our people are going and when, because they could reveal important techniques and procedures of the U.S. military. If you let those kinds of techniques out in the global space, that can empower our enemies. That can really put our troops in danger. If we knew, for example, a weakness on a Humvee, and that was in a classified document that WikiLeaks put out there, that would definitely endanger our troops.
But Paul, what about this one issue? Let's just stick to the Stingers for right now, and we'll call them Stingers. We don't know if they actually were Stingers or not. But given what you and I know about the effectiveness of those Stingers when used against the Russians, if there is a multitude of them out there and they're being used against our guys and we don't know about it, isn't that something Americans need to know when billions and billions and billions of their tax money is being used in this war and we're constantly making decisions about whether we should stay or go?
Well, maybe, but let me tell you this. Now also Al-Qaeda knows it. So now our enemies know that Stinger missiles may or may not be effective against bringing down C-130s. I mean, this is part of why the military keeps certain things classified. And I think we also have to look at WikiLeaks themselves here. I mean, this is a platform that operates without standards. It's run by an anti-war activist who said he's bent on ending the war in Afghanistan. And this published material supports his agenda. You know, we're a little disappointed as a veterans group that the mainstream media is running with this information like it's facts on the ground about Afghanistan. This provides a very incomplete view of what's happening on the ground, and it's a component. And I think we really need to look at Julian Assange, who is called for full transparency, but is running an organization under a veil of secrecy that operates outside of U.S. regulations. He doesn't disclose his primary sources. I mean, there's a bit of hypocrisy here coming out of WikiLeaks.
Well, okay, but to be fair, and look, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care either way, but from everything I've read from General Jones, for example, and everything I've read coming from the White House, it doesn't sound like they're saying this is all made-up crap. We don't believe it. We think that the media community should ignore it. As a matter of fact, they seem to be saying they're bothered by the fact that it's out there, but they're not putting it down.
Well, I've yet to talk to anybody who's made their way through the 91,000 pages, including the people from WikiLeaks themselves.
That's a fair point.
We've got to put it in context, and we've got to make sure that there's no information out there. And I would argue, Rick, you do have a dog in this fight. I mean, there are American troops in harm's way right now getting shot and killed. And if WikiLeaks is endangering them, we need to push back. And the American public needs to push back and understand that we've got men and women in harm's way. And
but if they're also, but hold on. Here's where this gets interesting. Here's the role of my role as a journalist. My role as a journalist is also to protect those troops with the truth, so that they're not getting buffaloed with somebody else who has a dog in this fight, who wants to make sure they're staying there, either A, for personal reasons, or B, for monetary reasons. Now, we've learned this in the past in this country, through examples in Vietnam and others, that truth is important. I'm not saying in this particular case every journalist has to go out there and just put this information out there without checking with the military to see what harm it might bring. But to say that the public doesn't deserve to know when it's their money and their sons and daughters' blood that's being spilled, I think that can also be a reckless decision. Paul, am I wrong?
Well, I understand that the public has a right to know, but let me give you another example.
In a democracy, yes.
But let me give you another example. Does the American public in the entire world have a right to know the president's travel schedule? Do they have a right to know exactly where he's going to be, what security measures are going to be? Right, that's what my point here is. If you've dealt with secure information, if you've dealt with top secret and classified information, you understand that it's
but what you and I are arguing about is absolute restrictions as opposed to some information being disseminated. Are you saying, and here, let me get you on the record, are you saying none of this should be reported, Paul?
I am not saying that. I am saying that, like everyone else, I have yet to go through the 91,000 pages, and we need to exercise a little bit of restraint here. Don't rush to judgment, and understand that Julian Assange, who heads WikiLeaks, is an anti-war activist who has repeatedly cast a very unfair light on the American military and on the American population in general. So I think you've got to take it with a grain of salt, and we've got to be responsible, and we've got to encourage the press and everyone else not to rush to judgment here.
That's a good point. And you know what? This conversation that you and I just had, I think, is an important conversation, and probably one that journalists and Americans and political leaders and military leaders should have as well, because it seems to me, and I got to let you go because there's a lot of other stuff that we got to get to. It seems to be there's no ironclad answer to this, but it's in finding that that compromise that we might be able to do this the most justice. You get the last word.
No, I think that's right, but I think we have to look at the source, look at the primary sources, which we still don't know, and look at WikiLeaks themselves. The government may not be telling us everything, but WikiLeaks isn't either, and I think we've got to take that into consideration.
Paul Rieckhoff, good guest. I'm so glad that we had a chance to discuss this and go through this, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again real soon, and we'll stay on the story and report what we can, and we won't report other parts of it, I suppose, as we go through it. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Rick. Thank you.
Take a look at this.